Support for this episode comes from the Diller Teen Tikkun Olam Awards. Applications and nominations are now open for the Diller Teen Tikkun Olam Awards. These awards honor up to 15 Jewish teens from across the United States with an award of $36,000 each to recognize their impact and leadership to repair the world. Nominate a teen leader today, or they can apply directly by January 9th, 2025. Learn more at dillerteenawards.org.
Have you ever wanted to live in a true Jewish village right here in America? Now you can. Berkeley Moshav is a multi-generational Jewish co-housing community located in the heart of Berkeley, California. Berkeley Moshav is a vibrant community of kids, elders, and everyone in between, participating together as neighbors in the rhythms of Jewish life. We are family-focused, Jewishly diverse, and open to all backgrounds and family types. To learn more about our Jewish co-housing community, visit berkeleymoshav.org and sign up for an information session.
This is Judaism Unbound, episode 457, Heshvan, Unbound. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Lex Rofberg.
I'm Miriam Charlinchamp.
And I'm Rena Yehuda Newman.
And we're really excited to have a conversation today about the month of Heshvan that we are in, the month following Tishrei with all of its holidays, that is a little less well known and sometimes spoken about as a month without any holidays. We're gonna come back to that because it's not quite true. But we're having a conversation inspired by Dan Liebenson, who, in a sad twist, is not able to be here today. At the last minute, he was not able to join us for recording. But he had this idea about Heshvan that I'll share as we dive in, which is basically Tishrei is a lot. The month containing Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Sukkot and Simchat Torah and Shmini Atzeret. A whole bunch of stuff in this beginning of the Jewish year, although it's the 7th month by the biblical calendar. There's just a ton there, and it can be overwhelming. And so we wanted to play around with this possibility that the following month, Heshvan, could be something like Tishrei Sheni. That's Dan's idea, High Holiday Sheni. And what that means, Sheni means second, or like do-over or repeat. But it wouldn't be a precise repeat. We're not going to replicate everything we just did. That would be even more overwhelming. The thought was that perhaps we could use this month as a chance to focus in on elements of the high holidays, either that we didn't feel we fully internalized the first time, or that we want to play around with in creative ways. Miriam and Rena Yehuda are very excited to dive in. Dan, unfortunately, isn't here, but we have a couple little notes from him that we'll try to build in. And we're excited to hear from all of you afterwards as well. But before we fully start, a couple quick reminders. We have our next Shabbat Unbound a week from today as this is released on November 22nd. So we hope that you will come and continue our 12-month-long Kabbalat Shabbat experience that we started a few months ago. We'll be honing in on Lecha Dodi, the sort of climax of the first part of the Friday night service. So we're excited about that. And also just a little sneak preview that Hanukkah's not too far away, and we've got our Apocryphest initiative coming. So that's going to be really amazing. We'll be talking more about it in future episodes, but start to envision the magic. So we're now going to dive into Heshvan, not get too ahead of ourselves. So I'm going to start with you, Rena Yehuda. What is Heshvan? Like, what even is this month? And how might we start to think about it a little differently?
Heshvan is a month that I often associate with a kind of calm and coziness. And I feel often the surrender or the quietness after the storm feels like my association with Heshvan. It's the time that the days are really truly getting shorter. We're past Sukkot, we're past Simchat Torah, and that there's a sense of it's just nice to be inside. It's nice to rest. It feels like it's kind of the hibernation month, has often been my association with it. After doing so much spiritual work throughout Tishrei, it often feels like, to me, there's a phrase in the psychonaut or psychedelics community, which is that there's the ecstasy and the laundry. After you have, all of these incredible ecstatic experiences, when you're having these really rich spiritual times and opportunities for growth and change and all of these realizations and revelations, there's actually the most important part, which comes after those ecstatic experiences, which is the laundry, and feeling like you're picking up afterwards and you're figuring out how to integrate the realizations that you've had into the rest of your life. And so for me, I often think about Heshvan as being the laundry to Tishrei's ecstasy. And I wonder, thinking about this notion of a Tishrei Sheni or High Holidays Sheni, what does it look like for the High Holidays Sheni to be something that is actually about integration, maybe more so than it is doing a complete do-over? I'll share that also when this topic first came up, my immediate reaction was absolutely not. I don't want a second High Holidays. But upon a little bit more reflection, I think what would it mean not to have a complete do-over, but to really think about what does it mean to then integrate the things that we learned or the things that we began to realize in the High Holidays into our daily lives, and what would a Tishrei Sheni look like if it's really about that kind of integration?
Yeah, I mean, some days I'm not. Some years I'm not sure I want a High Holidays reshown, like the first one. So I've said that on the podcast that I struggle very much with them. So there's a part of me that's more excited about a version that would be a little bit unhinged, just like ready to run in whatever direction. But Miriam, I'm curious your thoughts on Heshvan.
Well, I'm with Rena Yehuda. I kind of think about it as the yoga pants month or the stretch after the workout. That's like the best, the savasana. I don't know. I think that there's something about the high holidays where there's a pressure to do it right. And it's like we don't have that pressure about other holidays. I don't think quite the same way, but there's this need to show up in spaces we wouldn't normally show up. And perhaps the spirit of exploration or innovation is dampened during that time because there's all these requirements that perhaps there's a different pull to. And I was thinking about, for me, this was the first High Holidays in 20 years. I wasn't leading a service. It made me think a little bit like a big birthday. If it's your big birthday, it's your 30th or 40th or 50th, your 60th, there tends to be like, how are you going to celebrate it? But if it's your 22nd, you're like, all right, it can just be a day, in a way that the bigger sort of milestone birthdays don't quite feel that way.
This is hurting my soul, but I'll let you finish. I love birthday. I love birthdays.
I know you're like the best birthday person ever. But like my mother, when she turned 70, decided I can't do one big thing. I'm going to make it a year. I'm going to a year of 70 things I'm going to do, which is just awesome. And I sort of felt that way about this High Holidays, that when I watched services online before this moment, in all sort of candor, it was voyeuristically or to make my own services better, or as a second sort of like the dessert of what I'd already had done. And so it just felt supplementary. And this year I thought really intentionally about if I could honor the essential truths of the High Holidays, what would that look like if I was going to frame it rather than what others have told me it should be like? And it was really, really hard. But I will tell you, as I'm sort of sliding into Heshvan, I don't feel exhausted the way I have in years past. I feel more integrated this time. And I'm wondering if a High Holiday Sheni allows us to sort of let the big birthday sit behind us and allow like the year of turning 57, 85 to flourish with just a little less intensity. That's sort of where I am right now.
I love it. So I want to channel Dan because he's not here. And I want to pull in a particular passion of his, which is reminding our listeners and ourselves that the Jewish story that we have inherited is not the full story. There have been many cuts over the years, but in the Bible, we have direct, explicit evidence that there was a holiday in the month of Heshvan that was understood as deeply holy. Not only understood as holy, but it was basically the Sukkot of the northern kingdom. There was this split between Judah and Israel and the northern kingdom. Jeroboam was a key figurehead of the northern kingdom. And it's clear that there was this holiday on the 15th of Heshvan. So Sukkot begins the 15th of Tishrei, a month earlier. But there's a way in which part of why we might want to lean into this month as a deeply sacred time alongside Tishrei is that that's actually something that has happened in the past. And when we re-enliven past holidays, that can be a powerful spiritual act. What I'd say about that, and I don't know if Dan would talk about it the same way, is I think that when we engage with the practice of recentering marginalized holidays in Jewish tradition, like this 15th of Heshvan, Sukkot, when we engage with that practice of re-enlivening it, recentering it, I think it's a good practice for the important act today of recentering marginalized groups of people. I mentioned in the intro that we've got Apocryphest coming up. That's our whole theory of why we're leaning into these books of the Apocrypha that didn't make it into the Bible, or at least the versions that have been canonized by most Jews. It's not just like, ooh, cool, side parts of Jewish history. It's like fun and interesting, though it is that. It's also that when we retell our story Jewishly, to say, we're actually not just heirs of the folks who wrote the Bible and said, oh, all those northern kings, they're terrible and they were idolaters. And like, we got one part of the story. If we had another part of the story, we might have one in which the holiday was shifted a month to Heshvan. And so leaning into both, leaning into Tishrei and Heshvan, seems like a cool effort to do. But I'm curious to hear from y'all about that.
Lex, as you're talking about bringing in these more marginal holidays or these more marginalized holidays, and the way that that actually expresses something about the kinds of Judaism that we want to be building by centering the most marginalized of Jewish people, it makes me think about Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of a new month, and Hallel, which is the prayer service that we do during that period of time. There's a line from the liturgy, which is, the rock that the builders have thrown away has now become the head cornerstone. Right, and a lot of
Dan
people
loves this quote. We're really channeling him today.
It's a great quote. It's a great quote. And the idea is that actually the things that we think are the least important or the least powerful are in fact actually the source of the greatest strength and are the foundation for the kind of world that we actually want to build. When I think about that as it pertains to these more marginal holidays, or what does it mean to find meaning in these little, essentially like annotations or like cliff notes of things that we didn't necessarily inherit in the same way as that they might have been done 2,000 years ago, but we're breathing new life into them. There's a way that we're basically saying that these things that are often thought of as such details are actually incredibly important. And they're often the times and places that we can be the most creative because they're the least prescribed. When we approach things that actually don't have rules or scripts to them, it allows our creativity to play. I mean, I can talk about how that pertains to things like gender and sexuality for the whole day, right? When we think about how we have such prescribed roles about different people's gender performances or sexuality, when you enter into a space where those things are no longer true for you, actually all kinds of different relationships and connections become possible. I think a lot of that is true when we think about Jewish observance for different kinds of traditions and different kinds of holidays that actually don't already have prescribed rules or halachic observances. Playing in the space of what does a Heshvan look like for a Tishrei Sheni or a second high holidays or a kind of do-over feels meaningful. One of the things that this brings up for me, a lot of people who find themselves in a more halachically observant camp or are maybe more concerned with the observance of Jewish law in a specific way, there's a lot of anxiety that goes into that. Doing it right or doing it fully or doing it all the time, this kind of like frenetic. And the high holidays, I feel like, exemplifies that. And on a year where we have 3-day Chag, right? Like it's Rosh Hashanah day 1, day 2, and then Shabbos. And then Yom Kippur is Shabbat on Yom Kippur. And then we have Sukkot, day 1, day 2, Shabbos, right? Like there is so much observance. And it is so stressful for so many people. One of the lessons that feels like Heshvan brings to us, and thinking about Heshvan much more in relationship to Tishrei, is actually about being able to bring a certain kind of slowness and intention to the things that we learn out of Tishrei. What would it be like to actually observe these things and say that anxiety is not a value? Actually, there's so much excess energy that gets taken up by the anxiety that we experience through these things. And actually, we need that energy right now. I think about the state of the world. I think about currently the genocide that I see on social media and in news reports every single day. And I think about the kind of energy that I need right now in order to do this, in order to continue engaging and to continue the work of tikkun and teshuva for a long fight. And it's a long winter, right? I'm in New York City. Like it starts getting dark early. And it will continue getting dark for a long time early. And when I think about what does it mean to conserve that energy because we understand that it is a long winter, or we understand that the fight of liberation is a long fight, I'm very serious about asking that question about what does it mean to hone in those spiritual resources in a way that we're not depleting them on minutia about halachic anxieties that actually we should be integrating in ways that feel much more spiritually whole. What does it mean to get back that energy? What does it mean to observe these things in a way that isn't about anxiety, but is actually about soaking it in and taking it slow and being able to attune to the rhythms that our bodies actually need this time of year? That feels like a really important part of this holiday season that we never talk about, and Heshvan feels like it's rich with lessons for.
I really appreciate what you're saying about anxiety being kind of a core feature. I think it's definitely true of those who approach halakha, like those whose relationship to Judaism is very much refracted through the lens of Jewish law. I also think it's true for people who have different connections to Jewishness. And I don't mean to be doing the like Woody Allen thing and like, oh, anxious Jew, like, but I think that there is genuinely a notion that we need to do things properly, and that nervousness actually applies even to folks who don't think God is like commanding the particulars of the rituals. I mean, every year around Hanukkah time, I talk on the podcast about how I tend to get notes from people panicked during Hanukkah because they forget which direction to light the candles, like which way they're supposed to go. That's usually not coming from people who have a deep relationship to Jewish law, but there's still this internalized sense that like if I'm doing Jewish ritual, it needs to be proper. And I think Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur absolutely embody that. What I think is interesting is I'm starting to kind of understand why the Northern Kingdom might have had Sukkot in a different month. I actually think about the whole calendar of the year. It may be one of the holidays where there's the least likelihood of somebody being nervous they do something correctly. Now, I will say the one exception to that is shaking the lulav. I definitely see people like grab a lulav and they're like, do I go forward first? Do I go to the left first? Do I go north, east? Like people get very nervous. And I'm just like, friends, we're shaking some branches and connecting to the environment. Shake, dance, do your thing. Even within Jewish law, by the way, there's like a bunch of different interpretations about how to do that. But we get lost in that. And with Sukkot, though, the rest of the holiday, it's really like, hey, come to the sukkah, hang. Yeah, we'll say the one sentence blessing about sitting in the sukkah. But other than that, like, we're going to chill out. We can invite random people and we can do whatever we feel like doing, and that's chill. But I want to ask just practically. So one of my practical answers to what should we do in Heshvan? So I really receive fully, Rena, Yehuda, and Miriam, your feedback that this can't just be repeat of the high holidays as we've done it. I think Dan would agree if he were here. We don't want to just add to the overwhelm. We want to balance with yoga pants. But like, what should this look like? And I don't mean should in the, like, what are some ways we might lean into this? For me, one is like Sukkot. Like, I actually struggle every year because Yom Kippur to Sukkot is only a few days. I often, like, there have been years, including this one, where I was not able to build my sukkah. It was just there wasn't enough time, and I didn't get it up in my backyard. That's a bummer to me. If it were a standalone thing in Heshvan, I think that would be less likely to happen because there wouldn't be this frenetic pace where it comes directly after two other holidays. On a practical level, Rena, Yehuda, Miriam, what might we do with our bodies, with our minds, with our hearts during Heshvan for High Holiday Sheni?
So what I was thinking about is if you look at the Torah, the Hebrew Bible, you're going to see two major holidays, Passover and Sukkot. They are 6 months apart, and there's this pilgrimage energy to both of them. And yet we kind of know that the likelihood of people actually making a pilgrimage when they're trying to plant things, which would be Passover, was probably unlikely. And so pilgrimage likely happened for Sukkot, that people would travel together. That Sukkot was the main thing if we're looking at the Hebrew Bible. And Yom Teruah, which is Rosh Hashanah, the day of sounding the horn, was a little thing that's sort of a blip in the Torah. That was true for a very long time until there is no place to sort of travel to. And then we start adding more holidays. And all of a sudden, we have holidays in the winter and the summer. The energy of this season explodes with liturgy and rabbinic import. What happens, I think, with the Enlightenment is we decide that there's two ways to be. One is deeply Jewish in the and freeze time and have a codified liturgy so we know what we're all doing in the same way in the same place. And then there's the efforts to, be part of our neighbor's culture and to figure out how to assimilate a little differently. And I believe that we're in this point right now of trying to return back into, as I think Dan would say, a Marie Kondoed version of the holidays. What's meaningful? What were the origins? How did we change? And balance it with the fact that we lost some things when we decided that all Jews everywhere would do the same thing. Because the world that we live in, that's not true. It's not true that we all do things the same way. This makes me think a little bit about Sukkot and the effort of building and what we're trying to do. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, so the cover on top of our sukkah was evergreen trees. And then I moved to Los Angeles, and then the cover was palm fronds. And then I live in Ohio, and it's corn. And even though we have all different thatches on the top of our roofs, different ways of seeing light, we're all sort of doing something similar-ish and understanding that we live in different places, manifesting in different ways, but there is this connect of all of us trying to orient in one place at the same time. I love sort of the vulnerability of the booth energy, but maybe a way to think about extending that, especially for those of us who don't have the energy or the finances or the ability or the space to build a literal booth in our backyard. Maybe we're building little graham cracker versions of it. Maybe we're dressing up a part of our rooms in some way of welcoming a host or ancestors. I think the idea that we're on a similar timeline was the whole point of all these holidays. So if Heshvan is the timeline of chillness, of yoga pants and stretching, holding fast so that we're all sort of doing that together too, bumps up against this idea that we can sort of do it all again and make this pilgrimage in a different time.
Yeah, what do we do in the month of Cheshvan if we're doing a high holiday sheni? I kind of like the idea of hanging out with groups of friends to Fabrang, right? Fabrang in Yiddish means literally to hang out. That's used by Hasidic communities.
For bringing out.
Usually, right, for bringing out, right? To Fabrang is you're hanging out, but it's also got this other thing going on, right? A Fabrangin is a time that you're together generally with friends or other Jews in a way where you're talking about Torah, you're talking about some of the lessons that you feel like you're learning, some spiritual teachings. Sometimes you'll throw in a folktale or two, but you're also talking about your own lives. And it's about the integration of Torah and different teachings and spiritual lessons with the kinds of things that we're actually struggling with in our day-to-day lives. And there's a certain kind of intimacy, I feel, that comes out of that mode of relating. And after spending so much time in Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur mode, and for me, that meant like a lot of hours in synagogue, but also a lot of time taking walks over Rosh Hashanah. I was in beautiful Northampton, Massachusetts with a dear friend of mine. There are so many beautiful trees and paths to walk, and it felt very spacious. And so I think maybe a Rosh Hashanah Sheni or Yom Kippur Sheni is actually about more of that Sukkot vibe of just bringing
Rosh
people.
Hashanah.
This Rosh Hashanah is about bringing people together just to hang out and to really talk about the things that came up during the high holidays. Every year, whenever I look into the Machzor, whenever I look into the high holidays prayer book, there are new things that stand out to me. And no 2 years are really alike in what I bring to them or what they bring to me. And it feels like maybe it's a time to have like processing groups around it, because there is so little time between the holidays and Tishrei that it's like as soon as I feel like I'm done with Rosh Hashanah, I'm already thinking about Yom Kippur. And as soon as I'm done with Yom Kippur, I'm like running around my neighborhood to find like scraps of wood to like build a sukkah illegally on my roof. Right? There's not a ton of time to actually sit and think about the things that we just did. And that does feel like the vibe of Sukkot is to be able to bring those things together or just kind of hang out and rest, and ideally rest outside if ideally the weather is also nice. But thinking about Cheshvan as being a time of integration, what does it look like, to have coffee hours or tea hours, or you gather your friends in the evening to have a Fabrangen with, a drink or beverage, alcoholic or non-alcoholic of choice, to really process through what happened in the high holidays. I wonder what it would be like to do a different kind of service, right? If you like go through the Machzor actually with these groups, or if there's a way that you're engaging directly with that material, but feeling like it's a much more low stakes version of getting together, perhaps with a minion, perhaps with fewer people, to be able to go through this kind of liturgy and really talk about what came up for you and what's happened since. That feels like that would be a pretty meaningful exercise that I would be down to do. I'm thinking about how much of the liturgy for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is about God opening up the book of our days and being inscribed in the book of life, being inscribed in the book of Parnasa, in the book of livelihood and prosperity, right? That there's a lot of writing imagery, and it's very anthropomorphic, right? When we say Gemar Chatima Tova, which is often a greeting during the days of awe, during the Yomim Noraim, what that literally means is may you have a good inscription, right? And it's very striking imagery, and I think for me as a writer, there's something that's resonant about it. So during the beginning of Tishrei, God is doing all of the writing. What does it look like in the beginning of Heshvan if we do a bunch of writing prompts? What if in Tishrei, God is doing a bunch of writing in God's book, and Heshvan, being the more reflective period, is the time that we're doing a lot of writing and a lot of journaling. I made a zine a number of years back called 142 Jewish Writing Prompts. Prompts that kind of get people writing about various Jewish concepts or talking about experiences with holidays or the sort of more personal or autobiographical nature of what it is to write one's own Jewish story. And so I'm curious about what it looks like to continue on the writing motifs from Tishrei into Heshvan.
I'm curious if the two of you see it this way or our listeners see it this way, but there's something about the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur that feel vibey. Anything good that happens, I'm like, oh, I'm one more check in some life book. And even though I know it's a metaphor and it doesn't work for me, something negative happens, I feel it differently. I feel the connection to apologize, have hard conversations, different energy. It's like the air feels heavier. I'm not sure if that feels like that way to you two. Can that, for those of us who feel the vibe of those 10 days, is that actually transferable to other seasons? Like, can we pick that up and move it to Heshvan? We're talking about rest and energy and creativity, but like, what about the idea that something's genuinely happening in the world during this time that the ancient version of us understood and therefore amplified it with these holidays?
For me, I experience that more in Elul than I often do in Tishrei. That there's a sense of, because it's the preparation for it, that there's a time of the year where things go deeper. And I'm interested in that question, Miriam, of what does it mean for that to be more transferable? Or what does it mean to see those things as being differentiated in terms of the quality of time and the quality of time in which the things that we do have this echo effect? There's a phrase that I've heard before, which is more than the Jews have kept Shabbat, Shabbat has kept the Jews. And one of the things that I often think about with that is that Shabbat happens regardless of whether or not we observe it. It's a day on the calendar. It happens every week, and we can tune into it or we cannot, but it's still happening. And it's something that's actually far outside of us. And it's different than other holidays, which we more transparently recognize as being a thing that was created perhaps between Klal Yisrael, like between the Jewish people and God, that it was like a collaboration. But Shabbat was not a collaboration. Shabbat was a thing that like God implemented at the beginning that just like is a part of the nature of the world that we live in. And it feels like, Miriam, your question is about what does it mean to more regularly experience that kind of consciousness or that ability to plug in to the quality of time in which things can be more sacred, in which holiness can be revealed or is closer to the surface. Because I think we feel it, or at least I feel it really intensely in Elul, and it feels very, very clear during the high holidays because of how intense the time is. But wondering about, there are different and separate qualities to each season and to each month in which that holiness might be less emphasized in terms of the social dialogue that we have around it. But what does it mean to be attuned to the unique parts of each season, to the unique parts of each month, to unique parts of each holiday or absence of holiday in its separateness and differentiation in order to bring out that Kedusha, that holiness? And one of the translations of Kedusha is also separateness. That separation or distinction is something that's seen as holy in God's world. And so we might not feel that same kind of holiness or that same kind of significance at other times in the year. But what are the significances or holinesses that can be found in different parts of the year that are unique to them? What does this look like in Pesach time? What does this look like over Shavuot? What does this look like during Adar when we're thinking about Purim? Right? There are such unique sparks of holiness that I think are there for us to reveal. And thinking about Heshvan is the time that we go deeper into ourselves to be attuned to that and prepare ourselves for the rest of the year where we get to feel that. But we're not having the same kind of injunction that the high holidays give us about the import and the urgency that we often feel this time of year. I'm really curious about what it would mean to explore that through ritual or just dialogue.
So this is really awesome. I want to integrate something that you just said, Rena Yehuda, with something that Miriam said earlier. I mean, I also experience Elul personally more as the vibey part. I mean, I want to be clear. Miriam, you experienced the 10 days as that meaningful energy. That is a real thing, and I'm like positive there are other people who experience that. For me, I haven't as much, and and like what Rena Yehuda said felt resonant, that it's more Elul. But I actually think that this ties to what you were saying earlier about how the Torah conceptualizes Sukkot and Passover. I think for the Torah, the key moment of vibiness is the prelude or the crescendo, the on-ramp into Sukkot. And to mark that, it created two special days, Yom Teruah, which we now understand as Rosh Hashanah, and Yom Kippur, which were directly the appetizer to the big one, Sukkot.
The amuse-bouche.
Yes, exactly. So that makes abundant sense. History evolved, and now we could say we've mixed up or we've shifted what those holidays are. So they're no longer the prelude. They are their own thing. And so for me, it is still the case that like the Torah's system is that the prelude to the big stuff is a key moment of vibiness. Elul has become the prelude to the big stuff because it's what comes right before Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. We've shifted the goalposts of when the key thing is. And so that's the moment that really feels like elevated for me. But I think that you're right to say that we need a period of meaningfulness that is not just sort of the highly intense days themselves. And so I love what Elul can be on that front. And I think that we could, if we leaned into Heshvan, create sort of a bookend situation where we have we have like the rising action, if we're telling a story, rising action and denouement, right? Like there's the getting into it piece, and then the key Tishrei days become a climax, and then we have our outro. We have our we're still in the spirit. We would make Heshvan, maybe do-over is like the wrong word. Like it's a ripple. It's an extension, but a smaller, like what a ripple is. It's like the initial splash is big, and then like it gets smaller. And if it's a ripple, we sort of ripple, and then at the end of Heshvan, this gets to what we have been talking about before, that there's actually holidays in Heshvan. It's not just the Bible, but like at the end of Heshvan, the 29th of Heshvan, we have a holiday, Sigd. Sigd is an example of a contemporary way we could try to embody this practice of re-centering marginalized holidays. Sigd is a holiday marked by the Beta Israel. And by the way, Rena Yehuda had to go for the close of this conversation, so we're not going to hear more from them. But yeah, I mean, it's a perfect way to embody the spirit that we're talking about, because Sigd is a holiday that is very directly held as holy by a group of Jews that has been marginalized, that has been seen as not genuine or authentic or legit in many corners. There's still rampant marginalization of the Beta Israel in other areas of the Jewish world, who say things like, there are no holidays in Heshvan, when there is that major holiday of a group of Jews that we would benefit from noticing and lifting up and not pretending doesn't exist. So I think Sigd, and we've talked about this on the show in the past, but I think it's a chance for us to really lean into the power of this month. And what is really cool about it, it's not just like, oh, they picked the 29th of Heshvan for no reason. It is 7 weeks after Yom Kippur. it is a mirror image to the 7-week situation that we have with Passover into Shavuot. And if we look at that part of the calendar, because for context, there is this 7-week period of counting between Passover and Shavuot, the Omer, then there's this big holiday. And within that, we have Pesach Sheni. That's what we started with. So if we leaned into Tishrei Sheni, we would actually be creating a beautiful symmetry in the calendar where we have 2 times of the year that have 7-week brackets of holiness. One being Passover through Shavuot, the other being Yom Kippur through Sigd. Each of them in the middle having this Sheni notion, having this like, let's experiment, let's think about what we didn't do with our big holiday days and try to supplement or take the breaths we need. And I think that would be kind of powerful.
I don't think it just would be kind of powerful. I think it is powerful that these numbers align and there's this connection to a suppressed past that we get to reimagine in this place. Let's brainstorm some ideas that we could do in our Tishrei Sheni. I wanted to share what I did for Rosh Hashanah, and I think this is something you could do at any time of the year, but what I did is I rented out a small movie theater and I streamed 3 of my friends' services. Now, the tech was kind of difficult, so now it would be really easy to create our own mashup video of some kind or best hits of all different kinds of ways to manifest the high holiday without having to feel like, oh, I need to hit that song, or I love Kol Nidre, and that's a beautiful way of singing it, and Labshul did an awesome job, and Kesher Pittsburgh did a wonderful job of doing this piece, and just sort of finding.
Just for context, these are the ones you streamed.
These are also the ones that I streamed. Yeah. Yes, that is fair. I'm bringing examples but I did a lot of research of like, what did I want to feel? What did I want to think? Who did I want to be with? How did I want to talk about it afterwards with the people in the room? What did we need to eat? And there was this pleasure of like having popcorn and soda and passing a challah around that I feel like I wish I could do this every week of figuring out what the best of that wakes me up in this way. And I mean, those of you who have a nice TV don't need to rent out a movie theater, but there was something about being able to walk into a place that was both grand and mundane. It doesn't feel like a holy place. And yet we do know that we are moved by art and video and all kinds of things that happen in those places. So I'd love to just give that out to the world as a gift that happened in my life that I think any of us could do. Another thing that I did that I would love to do again now that I have a little time is I got dissolvable paper and washable markers and a big glass bowl, which you also could probably do in a body of water that didn't have animals in it. And do, our own little tashlich with colors and change and have intentions about what we're letting go of. What are we trying to do? Create Post-it notes that then go on our refrigerator and we sort of create our calendar of intention. I think that would be another thing that we could do.
I love it. Let's keep this rolling, the brainstorm front. I mean, I want to consider just embodied, or I don't want to say objectified, things that live in sacred objects. Like I want to think of practices that are tangible. I think we're better on this show historically with coming up with new ways to conceptualize moments of the year than we are new ways to embody, touch, feel parts of the year. I'm considering the practice around Rosh Hashanah especially, but this time of year, to dip challah in honey. And then the rest of the year to have challah with salt on a Shabbat table. And I'm doing like a lot of weaving of different things. So on Tu B'Shvat, so I'm grabbing from another time of year, Tu B'Shvat being the moment in winter where we start to look toward the spring and think about the new year of the trees. There's this practice on Tu B'Shvat. During the Tu B'Shvat Seder, you have like white wine, then you have like white wine with some red, then you have red wine with some white, then you have red wine fully. And it's like this progression. I'm wondering if we did a practice of like over those 7 weeks or over some, or maybe just the 4 Shabbats of Heshvan, having challah fully in honey to start, then like each week mixing the honey and the salt and eventually being fully in the salt, which represents the rest of the year. I feel like that would create, I really want a decrescendo. I think that's my main takeaway from this conversation. I want a progression. I want it not to be so stark.
You want a sunset.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
you wanna-
perfect. Yeah,
yeah.
a sunset. Exactly. I want Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and even Sukkot to exist. And some might argue Sukkot is kind of the decrescendo. Maybe it is, or maybe we should treat it more as
I
one.
mean, that's the person who has not had to take down a sukkah in the
Yeah.
rain that's like covered. I'm wondering,
Yeah.
Lex, if you could also do it with types of honey. You know, our bees are affected when have different kind of
Ooh.
flavors. So if you went from the lightest, sweetest wildflower honey to like the one that has been eating around saffron, or I don't know. I have a honey tasting that I did, and when we got to the 9th honey, it was like molasses. And I'm wondering if we're moving in the kind of spices that we're going from salt to za'atar or something like that, that there's some kind
Ooh.
of mix up happening. I love your idea. It's beautiful.
This is great and, pun intended, spicy. This is such a sweet ritual. This is such a spicy ritual. See what I'm doing, listeners? Do you hate me yet? Yeah, I love that it would, spice up the spices we all have and use, and push back on stereotypes that like for Ashkenazi Jews that we like don't have any interesting flavors in our food. But like, I also think that would provide character to each of the Shabbats. It would provide a uniqueness. Like, that's what's clear about a lot of our progression rituals. Like with the Omer, there's this notion that each of the 7 weeks connects to one of the Sphira, one of the emanations or attributes of God. And it creates a theme. It's nice to have a theme for the week. You're on a mission. You're on a path. And I think we need that with this time of year, because the whole point is on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we're like synthesizing the ways we want to be in the world and shift in the world. And if we don't have something afterwards guiding us, reminding us to do that, then I think it's less likely to happen. Like, and the remnants of honey, but the differently inflected honey, and you know more honeys than I do. Like, I would defer to you on the precise honeys we should use each week, and when we get to the salt of the za'atar and everything else. But like, I don't know, that seems powerful, and it also seems fun. I think we need this time of year especially to lift us up. I'll speak for myself. Like, I don't enjoy the shift from summer into winter, which, I mean, that's fall. Like I get sad, and I literally have seasonal affective disorder. Like I struggle a lot. And we talk about this in Hanukkah, right? Like, okay, we have this light festival in a dark time of year. But I actually think that my experience is that the need for that begins earlier, when the days are really lengthening, because we now have this like daylight savings fall back thing. That's like I would love to have a Jewish observance specifically the day after we do fall back and the day shifts and I get really sad. Like, I would love to have a banger of a holiday. Maybe we do that for Brengen, like Yehuda was talking about. Like, I really believe this need arises earlier. And if we were bringing that sweetness through literal food, through honey, that would help us meet a need that I think a lot of people have.
Lex, I hear this notion, and I think it's so smart, about titrating down. And it makes me think about Yitz Greenberg and this idea that we sort of slowly reduce our physical reliance on a very involved God, so that humanity can sort of take up the responsibilities of the divine. And I'm wondering if the same principle could be applied in what you're talking about, is not just our reliance on sweetness, but sort of our reliance on this idea that there's a way that we do things, a way that we pray, and that we're being eased into a season where we actually have to be responsible for these things, and that Heshvan is this test during that time of our reliance on this is what we do and how we are centered, and that Hanukkah becomes this little like blip of like, oh, we're back on track, like a little teshuva moment of there's light. Do you need help backing your way? Like we're a long way away from Passover that will ask us to really dig back into the spirit again. And so can we reduce our reliance on the obvious ways that everyone else is doing Jewish in this world?
This has been a really moving conversation. I can't wait to actualize some of these visions, that we should find our way to a kind of outro, a kind of decrescendo, where we're still soaking in, we're marinating, we're integrating, to use Rena Yehuda's language, what we've made kavanot about, what we've made intentions about from the high holidays. And we're noticing that that doesn't necessarily require us to just be beating our chests and saying a million words in synagogue all the time. It also can be through sitting outside with our friends in a sukkah, or sitting inside at a farbrengen, or eating honey. So that's exciting to me. And it's honestly one of the core teachings I think that we need Jewishly generally. Like when you say, Miriam, that Dan often argues for a Marie Kondo effect, where we would calm down a little and de-word and declutter our liturgy, I think that's really appropriate, and it's something that Jews across a vast spectrum of observance struggle with, that we think the meaning is not in the taking a breath, the simmering down, even as we have Shabbat every week. We miss that that's such a core part of our lives, and not just the saying a million prayers, saying a million words. So we're going to close there. We hope to see you at Shabbat Unbound on November 22nd, or throughout the rest of the year as we continue soaking in Shabbat wisdom. We hope that you'll be in touch with us with any wild, amazing ideas about Heshvan that were inspired by this conversation, or that you've had generally. You can be in touch via hello, HELLO, at JudaismUnbound.com. That will go to me and to Miriam, and we'll forward it to Rena Yehuda. And we also hope that you'll be in touch, if it's easier for you, on social media at Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatever. Our handles are at Judaism Unbound. You can go to our show notes for this episode, JudaismUnbound.com, to see some related resources, links to pieces that came up today. And we also are super appreciative if you're able to support us with a gift this time of year, even as it's already a new year. It's more common to do this around Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, but we're greatly appreciative of any amount of financial donation, which you can give at JudaismUnbound.com/donate. So thank you so much for listening. And with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.